Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Divided Films, the podcast where we talk about movies that audiences and critics do not agree on. Keith, my loyal co-host, is with me as always.
Snoochie Boochies, hello!
That's a new one, Keith. Are you trying that hat on today?
I was going to do something Silent Bob, and I realized I wouldn't be saying anything, but...
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we get into all that, let's bring in our guest for today, our friend Bobby Tarino. Welcome back, Bobby.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, no problem. So the one we're going to discuss today with Bobby is the 1999 comedy Dogma.
Yes, and Keith, I was actually going to do a silent Bobby bit, but yeah, that would require me not to talk, so that wouldn't have worked at all.
Yeah, as a pure audio medium, that sort of thing won't work. So our viewers will just have to imagine we're imitating physically Silent Bob's mannerisms. But speaking of which, so Dogma falls under the category of having a mixed score from critics and a positive score from audiences. So the critics' consensus, provocative and audacious, Dogma is an uneven but thoughtful religious satire that's both respectful and irreverent. So I'm respectful and irreverent. That's interesting. I feel like this movie is very of the times, right? Like it's like the 90s take on religion. It's got like all like the 90s comedians in there. It's got that 90s sort of attitude.
It's about as progressive as a 90s raunchy comedy can be. In a weird,
yeah.
And I'm saying that because no, there are things that have not held in that movie, no. But I was surprised. Like I guess I was clutching my pearls a little bit, but it turned out that it was far more, thoughtful and progressive than I remembered. But I grew up loving this movie, and I think now after watching it last night, I totally agree with that consensus. Everything down to the uneven part, but I'll get into that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I watched this a few times when I was much younger, in the few years after it had come out, and I don't know what's the last time I watched this movie, but I was enjoying the rewatch. I agree. I'm like, ooh, late 90s. Let's see if anything aged poorly. But I think for the most part, it holds up. I mean, there are certainly other comedies of the era that aged much worse than this.
It's not the best, point of comparison because most movies of that time just sort of threw around the hard F word like it was water. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's actually refreshing to see a comedy of that time, have normalized, LGBTQIA humor. It's not more so like it's still like it's not all the way there yet. I wouldn't call it like, this is progressive, but it's certainly a step. A lot of
I think it's I mean, it's nothing I would say is particularly like overly offensive or anything. It's just we'll get into I think that they touch on it a little bit here and there. But it's like kind of par for the course of the times. But I think that's like I don't think that takes away from a lot of the messages that I do like from this movie and some of the other things Kevin Smith is getting across. But Keith, what about you? I mean, had you watched this also when you were much younger? And when do you think the last time is that you saw Dogma?
This was the first ever movie I've ever watched on HBO. I went over to a friend's house, and he had HBO, and he was like, "Have you ever seen this movie?" And I'm like, "No." And I think Kevin Smith, for me, in the 90s and early 2000s, when Blockbuster was a thing, was a match made in heaven. This felt like I was seeing an old friend from school. And that friend still is saying the hard R word. Like, he's like, it's nice to see him, but he's still, I still enjoyed it. I with Dogma, it was nice to go back to. And I wish it was more. I wish it was on somewhere streaming or HBO. And there's actually like Weinstein licensing deals. Like this is actually a hard movie to find,
It's
but we
unfortunate.
found it.
Yeah.
But because this is, I would say, this is one of the more, I would say, aside from Clerks, which I think is his best, this one is the most rewatchable. Like you can go back to, and it is uneven. It is like it is flawed, and I would say it has that '90s teen or mid comedy budget look to it, if you know what I mean. And I think it went through those production problems. Selma Hayek just being like leaving for the movie and then coming back, and there was a reason for that. But I think it's clever. I actually, like, for a kid who went to Catholic school, I actually think it's clever than it has any more right to be. Like Metro. I had no idea what some of these, like, I had no idea what, like, the hierarchy of angels, or I don't know. It did something very clever while also, I don't want to say uneven tone, but Jay and Silent Bob are in it, and they added a fun to it that maybe the movie needed, where they had a low end protagonist that.
I like Jay and Silent Bob. I actually think when they have their place. With this movie,
Yeah.
I wouldn't even say that they were frankly the issue with the unevenness. But I suppose, like, now that you mention it, it kind of comes to whether this movie wanted to be a silly stoner comedy or whether it wanted to be like a dark comedy at points. And I think it sort of struggled to find that that medium, because there are scenes where it's it's almost like slapstick stoner humor. And then there are scenes that are like grim and violent. And it's not that you can't have those, in the same movie. Obviously, we have Deadpool now and a ton of like violent, absurd comedies. But it felt like this one needed a little bit more of a cohesiveness to it. And maybe that's it right there, Keith. Maybe it's like the cinematography, which felt, you're right, like it had like this sort of low rent 90s look to it, whereas I felt like a film of this nature maybe actually could have used a bigger budget, especially maybe the ending scenes. And it's not like it's that big of a deal. Obviously with Kevin Smith, he's more dialogue driven anyway. It just felt like some scenes in particular, like my favorite scene of the film is the movies scene, and it doesn't even really truly feel connected to the rest of the movie.
That's so good.
In terms of like the plot, like it doesn't really push the movie forward that much. It does show Loki sort of like before his turn of heart, or change of heart, I should say. But it's like the best. It's the best scene in the movie, and it just doesn't feel like it gels with the rest of it.
There's some like dark things that are addressed in that particular scene. So the movie thing, right? Because this is the View Askew universe, if I'm saying that properly, like Kevin Smith's cinematic universe, which maybe this is the first cinematic universe before Marvel. But it's a recurring thing in a lot of these movies. This fictional franchise of a cartoon cow called Mubi, right? And so they have that boardroom scene, and the two angels, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, go in there. And Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are calling out all these really atrocious things that these board members have done that, it's played not as heavy as the subject matter they're talking about, which I think they kind of get away with. And then the end, it ends in a very dark way, right? Like the violence in this movie is kind of played off in a humorous way where it's not as... You don't really realize the gravity of it, especially like at the end too, when they're killing all the people at the church, and you get a sense that like, a few dozen people were killed, but again, it's not really played as that serious. I think for me, the dialogue is what I enjoyed the most, and again, that's what Kevin Smith's strength is. I really enjoyed the conversations this movie had about race in the Bible, gender in the Bible. I think those are like the strongest ideas of the film, and kind of the point of the movie is to have those discussions. So I enjoyed those the most.
Yeah.
And then in terms of like the set pieces, there's like some action sequences in this movie that feel like the cadence of a lot of other movies at the time. You know, you have like your train fight scene, you have like some scenes with some special effects, the crap monster, and I think those were used to sort of break up the film. It's like you have these scenes of dialogue, but then in the middle you have these set pieces that it's almost like a certain rhythm that the movie is using to as a framework that I feel like a lot of other movies at the time were using. So it's definitely seems, even though it could have used a higher budget, it still seems like a very produced sort of movie, if that makes
It
sense. Like
does.
it definitely feels like it's coming from a studio.
The most
As
studio feeling Kevin Smith film at the time. Absolutely.
exactly, like in terms of like even like the way it's scored, it has that sort of conventionality to it. Whereas say like where he first started, Clerks, that's a very indie feeling movie, and it's interesting to see that progression. I mean, that's like a sign that he became a successful director and was getting backed up with more support. So I mean, that's in the one that's like a, you know, it's like a blessing and a curse in a way.
While it has been a time-honored symbol of our faith, Holy Mother Church has decided to retire this highly recognizable yet wholly depressing image of our Lord crucified. Christ didn't come to earth to give us the willies. He came to help us out. He was a booster. And it's with that take on our Lord in mind that we've come up with a new, more inspiring sigil. So, it is with great pleasure that I present you with the first of many revamps the Catholicism Wow campaign will unveil over the next year. I give you the Buddy Christ.
I think it's interesting too, Keith, you mentioned in the notes that this story was something that Kevin Smith had written, but he wanted to wait till he could do the effects properly. I think also it's something that maybe he needed a studio supporting to do. I don't think you could really do this film and everything the movie's trying to do with that sort of same indie feel that Clerks has. You need like a studio support to accomplish everything.
It does have that young energy to it. And what I mean by like the idea was spawned before Clerks, but his writing about religion does, like you mentioned it before, JJ, Kevin Smith's writing has always been like his strength in all of his movies, or most of his movies, I'll say. He directed this in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. I was doing the math on this, just curious. Like he's around our age, and I can imagine there is that like young energy about religion. Like this isn't written by a 40-year-old, 50-year-old scholar, and I'm kind of happy it wasn't. Like it would be very, like, I don't know. He made an entertaining religious movie, and I really haven't seen a movie like that since.
Well, yeah, the consensus said something about the Rotten Tomatoes consensus said something about respecting religion as well. And
Yes.
honestly, I get that. I get, Catholicism, wow, is a huge shot at, modern Catholicism. I totally get that. And the movie does like to crap on Christianity, but it's also, I do like his takeaway. I do like that faith shouldn't be determined by organized religion. And to those who are religious, I'm personally, like I might have mentioned earlier, I'm agnostic. I know that's a choose something, right? No,
Bobby, I wish you mentioned that before you brought you on the podcast.
I know, but I've never been really like religiously driven. But I do respect people who who are faith based and sort of see the sort of the positive redeeming qualities about having spirituality rather than those who are like obeying doctrines and and what the fundamentalists say. I think it's a nice takeaway, but at times I get it sort of does feel a little too I don't want to say it's because it's not like pompous or anything or pretentious, but it definitely
Right. It's
like
not
a
turning its
college
nose.
level take on theology almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a relatability to it, especially with the main character, the Bethany character, Linda Florentino. I think she does a good job conveying that struggle between wanting to be religious but not really having that faith within you, and just going to church as the routine, right? I think the movie is it's affectionate in a way where it, yeah, I mean, the movie is positing that this is a world where like there was an Adam and Eve, and there's all those theological things actually happened, right? So it's not a movie that's saying like this is dumb, it's not real. It is affection. I feel like almost in the same vein as like a Book of Mormon, right? It's
Yes.
saying
Yeah.
basically, there are a lot of great things about being faithful and a lot of good morals that come from that, but the how rigid the structure of organized religion has so many drawbacks that can sometimes overshadow the good of just religion, and I will like the general faith, the idea of just being generally faithful can have. So I think that at the end of the day, I like really appreciate a lot of the messages this movie is saying. I don't think it's trying to be super groundbreaking. I think it's just trying to have just like someone's like the director. I think that he's just trying to get his honest opinions about it, and it feels very honest to me. So I in that respect, I think the movie is successful in conveying not really an offensive, but just like some food for thought on religion. And I think only the people who are like super like the evangelical crowd, anytime you make any movie about religion, they get up in arms.
Of
I think
course.
that's probably where the controversy came. But if you're like a regular going Catholic, you probably can resonate with some of the things in this film.
The fun is coming from inside the house. I think Kevin Smith was also a Catholic schoolboy. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
I feel like you have to be brought up in that religion to really be that kind of critical of look at it with that eye. Like you're allowed to critique it, but you're kind of viewing it the same way you are, Bobby. Like people are like there is a way to find faith outside of organized religion. But I would guess that he went to Catholic school. Maybe not, or maybe his parents went to church. But
That or he seems very knowledgeable about the subject. I mean, he did his research.
And the research that I did do, like I think the Catholic League and all those people who were protesting, which I don't even know why people do that in general, because you're only going to, it's the Barbra Streisand effect. You're only going to drive people to the theater just out of curiosity alone. But those people did not even see the movie to begin with.
Right. That sometimes happens with any sort of controversial material where there are people who are just protesting the idea of it. They just maybe have the wrong idea about what it is, or have just seen the trailers and they don't like even the idea of it. They won't even give it a chance. And who knows? It's a shame, because if you see it, maybe you'll realize that it's maybe not as offensive as you imagine it to be. I also, I mean, we're mentioning like the era of when this movie was made, the 90s. It's so of the late 90s that I was actually really getting a kick out of it, especially in terms of the casting. I mean, you have like, Janine Garofalo has a small part, right? You get Chris Rock has a big part, and this is like just a few years after his career has really blown up. I like Linda Florentino in this. I think the whole cast really works. Oh, and then George Carlin. I mean, I'm a huge George Carlin fan, and this was a part that was perfect for him. I can imagine this is something right up his alley, because he didn't do a ton of movies, but it was cool to see him when he did do a movie. And this is something I can imagine that as soon as it was pitched to him, he was like, "Oh yeah, done. I'm there. Like, count me in."
Absolutely. I also thought Alanis Morissette was an inspired casting choice.
Yes,
as
that was
God.
so funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're missing the best.
How ironic.
Alan Rickman absolutely destroyed in this
I
role.
agree.
Like that is the role that you walk out. And he had fun, but I love that I had no idea what the Metronome was before all this, and Kevin Smith did his research. The voice of God. God does not talk. There's something, and to have Alan Rickman be the voice is so, I don't know.
Inspired.
Yeah, exactly. Like this movie took some big chances, and I think the only movie I could think to compare it to is like the Da Vinci Code, and so far Dogma is definitely on my list of like a movie about religion that's fun to watch.
It is fun. It's very rewatchable. I mean, also you get a very young Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. I think that's had to be just
They're like
1
out
or
of
2 years
Goodwill,
after
yeah.
Good Will Hunting.
Yeah. So
right?
right
Like
after Good Will Hunting.
they've really blown up too at this point. I think the story it feels like a very complete, well thought out story. There's like I don't want to say like a lot going on, but I like seeing the different storylines between the two angels and their crusade, and then like the main group of characters and their journey. It felt like very complete and a very smart story, especially with the beginning. They set up that old man, and you find out at the end, that was God. You know what I mean? Like it just seemed like he really fleshed out the story a few times, and maybe it's a good thing that he waited on it. Maybe that gave him enough time. Maybe he revised it a few times over the years, because the story itself seemed pretty seamless to me.
Yeah, no, it's like the idea of the last Scion and like the loophole, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very clever for. I'm not saying Kevin Smith isn't clever, but it's very clever for a stoner movie.
I don't know if I'd even call this a stoner movie.
View
really.
Askew is like a stoner universe. Like you think of Jay and Silent Bob, and like I don't know. Yeah, it's not a stoner movie, but a '90s comedy. I'll say. How about that?
It's not a stoner comedy, but it definitely was marketed as one. Case in point, the poster is a creation, but it's passing a joint. So
yeah, I mean that's. I've mentioned a few times, especially in recent episodes, my gripe with how some movies are marketed, especially again like Kevin Smith. Clerks was a big hit. He comes out with Mallrats, and there was I think one other movie, Chasing Amy. I think it was also, or was that a couple years after this?
That was his third. Dogma's the fourth. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I guess he had built a certain reputation, and so the marketing team is going off of what they know people liked about his previous films, and this is very different from what he had done before. I mean, yes, he has the Jay and Silent Bob characters in there, and maybe some of the humor is in a similar tone, but I feel like this is a step up in terms of maturity for the subject matter he's tackling, and it's philosophical in a lot of ways, in a way that you normally would not get in a stoner comedy. But then
it's
again,
philosophical enough.
Clerks too. I mean, Clerks also has Clerks as well. I should say, not the movie Clerks 2, but Clerks as well. And that's like a movie also driven through dialogue and getting like people's just takes on all different kinds of subjects. But I think Kevin Smith really likes to dive into his characters' perspectives on all different kinds of subjects. And so, like
you even said, like with Chasing Amy, it's dialogue driven, and it actually talks about themes, and it has philosophy and beliefs and ideals behind characters, and I really like that about a lot of his characters and a lot of his screenplays. I think this film needed to be tightened up for me in order to have kind of maybe shaved that unevenness was to sort of maybe even decide if it was going to be more, like I said before, if it was going to be a darker comedy or if it was going to be a stoner comedy, and not saying that those two can't merge and find a meeting point in the Venn diagram, because it did. For the most part, it was successful. But I do think that sometimes the inclusion of Jay and Silent Bob, while I do really like them, it does feel a little. And also, almost like my issue with Chasing Amy, like it does feel a little forced. It's not like those characters could have still had stoner characters be in the role, but them just being Jay and Silent Bob sometimes took me out of the film, especially in the scenes that we're trying to more or less shock. I think with the scene with the movie's board getting murdered for all of the terrible things that they do, that is like, I'm going to just go back to that scene for a second, because I think it's the best film in this in the entire movie, and yet sometimes when I think back to it, it feels a little disconnected. And I think it does show that Loki wants to be, it shows that Loki is sort of just chaotic and wants to, remove the sinners from the world. But it just feels like that right there, that whole scene could have been an entirely different film. And it's sort of the movie I wanted to see, because every time the movie focuses on Bartleby and Loki, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, it's far more interesting to me. I think the idea there sort of could have lent to a horror comedy that I know now Kevin Smith is pretty apt at doing. That scene, like you were saying, like, these are terrible people. Like, you want them to die. But they set the tension in that scene. The way that Kevin Smith builds the tension is actually it's very palpable. You're like, oh man, like, these people are going to get their just desserts, and it's going to be pretty horrific. And
Yeah, with the voodoo doll especially, even though you know nothing's going to happen, that voodoo doll is even
I don't
still
believe
like,
in voodoo.
and
Yeah.
and I was just thinking, like, this is such a well made scene. Like, it's tense, it's scary. It sort of reminded me of like how he did Tusk. I know Tusk is, talk about a divisive movie. You should talk about Tusk one day on this podcast.
Oh my
Because talk
God.
about a divisive movie. I actually like that movie quite a bit too, because I feel like Kevin Smith sort of understood like how to blend horror and comedy in a way that was effective. And that one scene in Dogma, it was almost like a progenitor to that his forte into that genre. It's so compelling, it's so intense, it's disturbing. Even like I said, like, even like, you hate these people, but them getting shot up and seeing the blood getting splattered all over the wall with the ironic movies soundtrack playing in the background is very well done horror comedy, and I
Yeah.
wish the movie leaned more into that tone.
One thing I noticed about this scene on this, 31 years into it, when Ben Affleck sneezes, or whoever sneezes, like, they look around
right.
to see if anyone's saying "God bless you," and I never caught that until later on.
Yeah, that pays off at the end of the scene. I think, yeah, with that scene, I was thinking of like the right sort of term for it. I feel like that kind of humor, it's like sadistic humor, especially with the blood splattering on the door handles and the very light movie cartoon music. Like you said, it has that sadistic humor that we saw maybe like, in the 90s and so forth. And I feel like that is very throughout those Ben Affleck, Matt Damon scenes. And what was really interesting too is that those characters, their dialogue is interesting, but it's so unique because of who they are as characters. They are these biblical fallen angels, and they are talking about really wild subject matter, and they're openly talking about killing people in public around other people.
Very
And they're-
Tarantino-esque.
Yeah, and they're constantly having other characters, or like, these background characters, react to them like horrifically because of what they're talking about, and they're so fearless because they're angels. Like, what's going to happen to them? They don't care.
With the exception of Miss Price here, there isn't a decent human being amongst you. Not one. Do you know what makes a human being decent? Fear. And therein lies the problem. None of you has anything left to fear anymore. You rest comfortably in seats of inscrutable power, hiding behind your false idol, far from judgment, lives shrouded in secrecy, even from one another. But not from God.
Yeah, so that part of the film, or maybe like that half of the film, right? Because it goes back and forth. I agree. It's a bit more of like a dark humor, whereas you get more of like that. I don't want to say wacky humor, but it's like
you
a bit
get
more.
Shit Monster, which is great, but you get Shit
Yeah.
Monster like scenes later, and it just doesn't feel like it's the same type of humor. I'm not trying to like criticize like, Kevin Smith, or you should have a consistent comedy all the way through, but it's really, really fascinating how that movie could have been so much darker. And I just feel like with Loki's turn too, like, all he does is smoke weed with Jay and Silent Bob, and suddenly, like, he's all about humanity. Like, again, funny in a comedy where Jay and Silent Bob are the leads, but I don't really feel like they were in this movie. They were, they are integral to the plot and the story, but I just felt like these could have been stoners still, but it's just them being Jay and Silent Bob still.
Well, you got me thinking. I think I'm trying to find an answer. I'm not trying to like defend or condone it. Because you got me thinking of like, Kevin Smith was definitely like the indie it boy of the 90s. Like you really you come out the gate with Sundance, with Clerks, and we're gonna have to mention them. The Weinsteins pick you up and give you a film career, and you have some lows, and even your lows become cult classics in terms of box office, and you have some really good like Chasing Amy. I still think is, even though we kind of moved beyond it in terms of the conversation, the LGBTQ plus I'm getting it wrong, probably, but they regard it highly as like it's part of that community. It's part of that club, or I don't know. It's but with Dogma, this is his fourth film. I bet he's asking. I wonder if he asked himself, like, do I have to put Jay and Silent Bob in this?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking, actually watching this, are they necessary to the movie? And I think I could tell that he worked in ways that they contributed to the outcome of various scenes, even if it was inadvertently. So, for example, when they steal the Cardinals' golf club, right, that helps them defeat the demon played by Jason Lee, right? Because it's it's like a holy blessed club, right? Like there's different ways where I think he invented ways for them to be more important to the plot, and not just two guys who are making jokes and maybe just as comedic relief. So it's at like a touchstone of his movies. Maybe it's something that maybe he questioned, but it's I don't know. I kind of get a kick out of how they're in all these different adventures through all these different.
I know,
movies.
I don't know if it's a catch-22 or maybe it's like the reverse of that. I think he also wanted to keep an eye and still hang out with Jason Mewes, who has been open with his struggles, and I think has even said this was that like he was at his worst with his addiction during this movie. But if they were two stoner characters, people might have said, hey, but you're the Jay and Silent Bob guy. Why didn't you put Jay and Silent Bob in? It's kind of interesting that this movie is in the View Askew universe, and you really, I think only Alanis Morissette pops up at the end credits of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Like, I don't think this movie, no other character is popping up. I know Banky and Brody pop up in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Holden pops up. Randall, like they all, like everyone. There's definitely a connection throughout all the movies, and this one kind of seems like a mature outlier.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I don't want to say like the black sheep of the group because that implies something negative, but yeah, I agree. It stands out in terms of its subject matter, and
it's the Black Lamb of God.
Ooh,
appropriately enough. That was like interesting too. Some of the ideas I think they introduced in this movie were ahead of its time. Like the idea of Jesus being black, I don't think I really heard that in a mainstream conversation until many years later, that idea. Because I think at the time, maybe it was like sort of a lesser known idea that at least he wasn't white. But at the same time, people were not going to really talk about that or be willing to even entertain the idea that Jesus was black. And then now, like, I think by the time I was out of college, I think that sort of idea was picking up steam again, at least the idea of him not being white. So something like that, I think this movie was a little bit ahead of the curve with, yes. And that's like a risky thing to bring out. I don't think people really.
I agree. I think it's always what I've always found this film's strength to be is its sort of challenging and subversive humor, right? But not even just with theology and not even with its religious takes. I think sometimes even on rewatch, there was one joke that was really funny. Completely subverted my expectations on how the outcome was going to come. And it's such a small moment too, and it's in that Candy Girl moment with Serendipity dancing, and it's a silly scene, but when they're all like competing for her, her affection with money, and they keep like, one-upping with a larger sum of money. And you see the other gang with Jay and Silent Bob are competing with. And again, this is like a moment that feels so disconnected, but it's still funny, so I got to give it credit. And like he looks so angry, like he's telling like his other gang members and his and his loyal confidants to like get more money, and he's just like he looks so angry. And in the next, like, and you obviously expect like there to be a confrontation, and in the next scene, they're all just dancing, and I think that's just like a nice, funny little moment I never noticed before. Because you obviously expect it to break into
in the same
fight.
scene and in the same scenario there too. I like also the moment after like that gang tries to fight the poop monster, and I guess they're all like knocked out or killed or whatever, and then Jay is like, "Well, I guess we have to lead the gang now." Yeah, like it is still effectively funny, but like that kind of humor, right? It's more, gosh, it's I think that's more conventional humor, right, compared to like the darker humor you have in the Bartleby Loki plot, which again I don't mind. Each on their own, I'm on board with both.
Yeah,
and I don't think I really thought about that dichotomy between the two different storylines until you mentioned it. And again, yeah, you're right. It's not a criticism, but I can imagine maybe you could have had a whole movie just following Bartleby and Loki, and that probably could have worked too on its own.
I do think that they're both. I think I like both stories, and the way that they're connected. At the end of the day, I think it's well done. I just think
it was unexpected on the train scene, right? It was like, oh, okay, like now they're just together. I
liked that. I was going to mention the train scene. I do like, even though it's a, I guess Loki changes after a joint with Jay and Silent Bob, but I guess when you think about it, having a Jay with Jay and Silent Bob might fix all. He
mellowed out. He mellowed out after that,
Yeah,
and then Bartleby changes for the worse, right? He goes the other direction.
I did like that,
and is more extreme. So it's something that I think I first was questioning after watching that. Like, wow, they seem to really change all of a sudden. But I guess they both have like a moment on that train that totally changes the trajectory of where they're going emotionally. So it's subtle, but I think for the purpose of the story, and then the Bartleby character taking center stage as the villain, I get it.
I think with that train scene and the scene that actually follows afterwards, where they're in a parking lot and they're sort of talking about, now they're how like the how the tides are sort of turning, and they're having a bit of a role switch with their philosophies. That scene was important, and I guess when I was a kid, I just I don't know, completely forgot about that scene. But I always felt the same way, JJ. I always felt like that turn was a little jarring, but it's actually not as jarring as I thought. And when I think about it, it makes sense. And I think that train scene and the scene right after are really strong because it does eventually connect those two plot lines.
We are forgetting, and I think actually this is kind of important to the unevenness of it. While Ben Affleck and Matt Damon knocked out of the park, Azrael is also he's the spark of the bad, like he is the bad guy that inspires it. And I really enjoyed Jason Lee in like all of Kevin Smith. That's where he kind of really broke through as an actor and really shined. But I wish Azrael was more. It took me, once again, this rewatch, I had no idea that Azrael was a muse.
Oh, I think I remember that though from a previous viewing, because I just remember that dialogue he has in the bar scene at the end with Serendipity about how he was a coward and didn't fight and was therefore punished. I think I remember that part of for some reason that stuck out to me, and I remember he was a muse as well.
Yeah, he was a muse.
Like,
I must have missed that line. I totally missed that he was a muse and he chose the wrong side and just hated, like he'd rather not exist than spend in hell. I got all that except for the muse part, but I just wish like we had like, he was so fun on screen, and I just wish we had a little bit more time to, I don't know, get to know him. I don't know. He was the way he goes out, very clever way to go out, but he just goes out.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Jason Lee, for me, I feel like he was maybe like overplaying it a little bit. But I like the story of his character and his motivations. That hell is so bad, he'd rather not exist, and that is what's driving him. And I dig all that. I do think it was funny though, some of the little lines he has, like in that one scene they're in, like I don't know, a Walmart or something. He's like talking to the angels, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I told them I was up on a routine exorcism." That line for some reason stuck out to me because I'm like, "Oh, did they have like a schedule of just of exorcisms? Like, all right, Azrael, at 3 p.m. on Friday, you go up, you possess this person or something. I don't know, like." That I thought was a little funny, but for the most part, I think his physicality is a bit over the top at times.
You know what's funny? I just learned this. Adam Sandler was originally going to play Azrael.
Wow. Okay, I did not know that. I did know that that Jason Lee was originally supposed to be Bartleby.
Loki,
Is that
I think.
right? He's supposed to be Loki. Okay, he was originally supposed to be Loki, but I don't know. It just makes sense to pair Ben Affleck and Matt Damon together, just because we just knew them from Good Will Hunting, and they already have that chemistry established with each other. So I think that it was destined that they would play those parts.
I wonder how Adam Sandler would have played Azrael. You say overplayed. I think you Adam
that's
Sandler
true,
would
yeah.
have went.
Maybe we would never have gotten Little Nicky.
Maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah, man.
Or maybe he would have done Azrael as Little Nicky.
That's what I'm thinking. I know I'm a little late to like just like it took me years to realize like what the muse was. Like, oh, I am an abstract thought and I found a body. Like I never got that. And granted, this is like it's like I watched this when I was like 7 or 8. You come for Jay and Silent Bob, but you stay, I guess, for the religious philosophical discussions. But I just never.
And also
I'm happy. It's so clever. It's very clever.
Yeah, and then also you stay for these sort of things you didn't know about Jesus and so forth, quote unquote things you didn't know. So the fact that there was a 13th apostle and Chris Rock explaining, Chris Rock kind of going on about what his life was like as an apostle and his relationship with Jesus, that was all funny. Or even, Alan Rickman, just the explanations of the mythology and seeing it come into play, I found very entertaining. I think at times it was a bit exposition-y, but I didn't mind because the actors, especially like Alan Rickman, are so charming, and they added, they made it interesting enough that it didn't feel like just an exposition dump. There were things happening, and the actors are so good that it worked. Because you have to explain it. You have to have, you have to show it, but at the same time, you have to lay out the rules, and they did it in a way that worked.
What's he like?
He likes to listen to people talk. Christ loved to sit around the fire and listen to me and the other guys. Whenever we were going on about unimportant shit, he always had a smile on his face. His only real beef with mankind is the shit that gets carried out in his name. Wars, bigotry, televangelism. The big one, though, is the factioning of all the religions. He said mankind got it all wrong by taking a good idea and building a belief structure on it.
You're saying having beliefs is a bad thing?
I just think it's better to have ideas. I mean, you can change an idea. Changing a belief is trickier.
So, I mean, personally, I feel like I'm higher on this than the critics. I thought, maybe I was going to go into it and maybe it wouldn't age well for me. But for the most part, I think I was enjoying it just as much as I did when I was younger. And I might want to rewatch it again. I feel like if this was on Netflix, for example, I would probably put it on every now and then. It would probably be like a top Netflix movie. It's a shame that there's that whole, ownership thing that makes it very difficult to watch, because otherwise this is a very rewatchable movie and it would be probably one people go back to a lot.
I think we just need more like comedies like this. I don't know, or movies like this. Maybe not even well,
it's a comedy with an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Or a bunch of ideas, really, but it's a comedy that is writing some really strong ideas. And comedy, there's it's really funnily written, and you get obviously like familiar characters, And I mean, you're also bringing in a bunch of comedians who are doing their thing. I think, Chris Rock is kind of doing his Chris Rock thing.
He had
You
to
know
be
what I
the
mean? But
guy
again,
to tell you. I thought he was the most appropriate actor to tell you that Jesus was black.
I
I
also
agree.
thought his line about we only know about characters from the Bible because of the movies.
Yeah.
I thought that was, and all the lore we know is just because we watch, and taking all this media. I thought that was very funny, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of great jokes, a lot of just fun stabs at religion. Like I said before, yes, a little uneven with the humor, but the scatological humor, the stoner comedy, and the dark comedy, they all land in their respective moments. So it all works. Maybe in hindsight, it doesn't gel the way I would want it to, but nothing's perfect. So
Right, yeah. I mean, I think it's solid, I would say.
Yeah, of
Inconsistencies here and there, but what comedy doesn't have,
Yeah.
not every joke is a home run. I mean, yeah, for me, the poop monster thing, that was also very, I feel like the late 90s, early 2000s comedies around that time, all of them for some reason had some poop humor in them. I don't know why. Either something with butts or something with poop. I think even like Roger Ebert had a gripe about it at the time. Why do I feel like I'm always going to like the colonoscopy office when I'm like watching comedies and it was like it was like a weird trend at the time that sort of fits in. But yeah, that's like the one thing that maybe felt like I didn't like, just because like I don't know, I don't like poop humor personally. They made it kind of work with why there is sorry, I guess I'm too highbrow to enjoy a classic poop joke. Sorry. But everything else I thought was enjoyable.
I think the last bit I want to add is just I thought we mentioned it before, but Alanis Morissette was like perfect as God, like, or at least how God was handled. Like the answer, what is the meaning of life? Like that's it's funny, but it's also like a really good response to that.
I was a cute. She's a cute God.
She is a cute God.
I like the things like the other characters say about Jesus and about God, like how God has a really good sense of humor, or about how Jesus just likes to listen to people talk. They kind of made them feel like, more normal people.
Humanity. They brought the humanity to these people that we put so much importance and emphasis on our lives. Even us three who are, we're not as obviously, we don't. I don't want to speak for anyone here, but we don't see him as hell-bent Christians. But the thing is, we are so, how do I say? We are just. It's force-fed to us, like it's in this nation, obviously too. It's just this imagery, the idea of Jesus and going to church every Sunday, and just all like, even the debate of state versus
like separation
of the church and state. It's just it's so ingrained in our society, in our culture, that we want to make fun of it. It's in us to just make fun of this sometimes. And so many people have like they're clutching their pearls, like I was saying earlier, or they're so against any sort of
I hear you.
Anything against their beliefs. So when they have like these characters talk about God and Jesus being like human, for us viewers, it gives us funnily enough, it gets us more on board with the ideas of religion than any other thing could, truly.
I think that also just plays into how charming this movie is. Like, oh, God is like someone who is, can be funny and stuff like that. To add that humanity, like you're saying, just adds into the levity this movie is bringing. And I think the right amount of levity, because obviously religion is so important to so many people, especially in this country. And if you're going to, make humor out of it, I think it helps to come from a place of understanding and empathy. For example, like it's easy to come into to tackle religion from sort of like an aggressive way and just kind of crap all over it. I think that's like you can easily take cheap shots
Right.
at religion,
Yeah.
and that's just gonna really bounce off and
It's just
affect
gonna
people
that's
for the
gonna
wrong
really
reasons.
piss people off. But
For the wrong reasons.
But for
you
the
know, it's
wrong
not
reasons too.
thoughtful.
Like people are gonna go. You're right, and they're just gonna be like, "This was just a stupid comedy." Whereas we go in, we're expecting that sort of humor, and then we walk out being like, I sort of understand why people are spiritual and faithful. And if a movie like this can make you feel that, and it can evoke that sense of appreciation, as well as being able to take a few shots at it, then I think it does deserve that the title of being respectful. Ironically enough, a movie, Dogma, that has it in the title. It's about hypocrisy of religion, and yet it comes out with a very hopeful message, and I like that.
One that still stands 20 so years after this movie premiered and everything that the Catholic Church has been through. So I think it still stands the test of time. I do bet, like, I'm willing to bet any religious people who were like against the movie at first and then saw the movie had the conversation of like, there were bits and pieces that I liked. It actually was kind of interesting. I just didn't. The most offensive thing was that Jay character. Like,
And the
they,
poop.
like, I would say like there was some vulgarity in it, but I actually thought they handled the religion. I'm just imagining like two old ladies seeing this movie while they knit. It just I don't. If people. Whenever they hear something that's they think that's attacking them, they put up their shields, and then they realize, like, are you gonna let a comedy? Hey, go see it. Like, go see it, because I think maybe someone's telling you, like, have your own opinion on the matter, and then you'll realize it's not that bad. It's actually kind of insightful in a lot of ways, and even the characters themselves find Jay to be offensive.
Yeah, exactly. It's the characters are acknowledging that Jay is a vulgar guy, and
That's
he's actually
what I like too. Like they're not like they're hyping him up or anything, or allowing this behavior to go on. They're always disgusted. They always cut to a character rolling their eyes in disapproval. He's always in the wrong, which is
he's the butt of the joke a lot of the times, right?
times.
Yeah. And, I think too the fact that this movie is empathizing with people who are religious, I think that makes it easier for religious people to laugh, because it's like, this movie understands where I'm coming from.
Inside baseball. It's inside baseball, basically.
Yeah. Therefore, yeah, exactly. So it's like, because for me, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and there are a lot of things that I related to as well. About like. Yeah, I mean, if anything, I feel like Catholics are probably the kind of Christians that are able to laugh at themselves the most, but I could tell, like, just from the tone, this is a guy who, like, is coming from a place of understanding, and it's easier to get on board from there.
God, there's a million things I wish I could ask you. Most of it all questioning what I'm sure is your great plan, and that would be really arrogant of me, I know. But there is one I need to ask, and I'm sure you get it all the time. How many opportunities like this will I ever get? Why are we here?
Didn't I tell her she was funny?
Okay, so I think we can now get into our final thoughts, final scores on Dogma. So, Bobby, if you want to get us started off on what your percentage score would be, and any final thoughts.
Yeah. Let me think about this for a second. Well, as the indecisive agnostic gentleman I am, let's see.
Typical agnostic.
Just choose something. I think.
God. Get it?
If I don't, I'm going to be getting it. I'm going to be getting a whole bunch of it. I think I'm going to give this. I know I was probably maybe in this conversation the most critical on it, but I'm going to give it it's an 8 out of 10 for me. It's an 80%. I think it belongs in that territory. Yeah, like I said, there are a few things that are uneven, maybe don't gel as well as they could. But for a comedy from the late 90s tackling such, heavy themes, I think it does a great job of handling it. It is funny. There are likable characters with arcs, and that's sometimes like you don't get that a lot in any movie. So there you go. I think it does a lot of things right, and it does serve as one of the best Kevin Smith productions.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. So you took the words out of my mouth, and I have nothing to say. I guess.
Out of my mouth.
Clap, clap. Yeah, we'll see. I guess I'll have to think of something else to say when it's my turn. But 80% for Bobby. And then what about you, Keith?
I'm happy. I'm happy we did this because it's been a while since I saw this movie, and I realized this movie's. You're right, JJ. This movie is. If this movie was on Netflix or something, I would probably, if I didn't have anything to watch, I wouldn't mind putting this on again and getting some new details out of it that I missed before. I would say I've enjoyed Kevin Smith's journey, and he's still going. Thank God. I think this is one of his better ones, better well written. I was getting 77.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. It as much as I did when I was younger, it still holds up, and yeah, I laughed a lot. And I think I will probably rewatch this again as long as the YouTube version that we watched is still up. If it's something I'll revisit again, and maybe I'll revisit again sooner than I'll realize. Just I don't know. I think I rediscovered my affection for this movie. So
Well, hopefully they figure that out and they can get it redistributed or something because
I know it's bull
it's
crap.
not fair. Like I actually was listening to a sort of really sad it was either a podcast or some cast with Kevin Smith, and he said like right before the whole Weinstein incident broke out, he like got a call from him, and he was just like, "Oh, we should do like another Dogma or something like that. That movie was great," and they were like reminiscing about it, and it's just like, "Oh, this guy's such a terrible guy," but he basically he like was I guess a friend to Kevin Smith, and like Kevin Smith like believed in him, and that just sucks. Like you know what I mean? Like
It takes
talking
a
about
lot
faith
of-
and belief, that just sucks to
I
put your
know.
faith in the wrong person. And I really hope that they can find a way, like Miramax can figure out a way to get this thing redistributed, so that it can get a proper Blu-ray or 4K release, and people can get on with this movie. Because I think, honestly, like we were just saying, it might be one of the best Kevin Smith movies.
Yeah, I think a lot of people liked it at the time, and maybe I hope people haven't really forgotten about it. But if they did, it's because its movie is nowhere to be found, and yeah, it's unfortunate because a lot of things we really like from the '90s and like afterwards, but a lot of those independent movies, unfortunately, the Weinsteins had their hands on, and it's like we shouldn't let it taint that entertainment for us. It's just it's unfortunate.
I do wonder how the younger generation view Kevin Smith, because he's someone who's always been in the entertainment sphere, and now he really kind of comments on superhero stuff. Sometimes he'll direct like an episode of Supergirl. I think he's doing the new He-Man. He's always like crying at like the season finale of Flash or something. But I'm like, I wonder if the generation behind us, or even well, I'm sure our generation knows how big of an impact he had in the 90s. Like,
Are we all from Jersey? Are we all from New Jersey?
Yeah.
Yeah, even bigger impact for us. I
Yeah,
guess.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. I like that this is, they're going to like, Red Bank and,
Leonardo and like all these places I've actually been to. Right.
I thought that was pretty funny. And they walked past the crappiest "Welcome to New Jersey" sign at one point in the movie. I will say too, I guess I didn't realize that Linda Florentino and Kevin Smith did not necessarily get along, according to Keith's notes. But I wouldn't have known because I did think she gave a really good performance in this, and I really liked her character's arc especially. So that was like one last thing I wanted to throw in there. So my percentage score will be, I think, higher. I think I'm going to give it like an 82.
Nice. Yeah.
Oh, you know what, too? While Keith calculates that, I will say, too, that during the train scene, the joke that made me laugh the hardest as a kid is at the end of that train scene when after Silent Bob throws the angels out the train, the one guy's looking at him, he goes, "No ticket." That was, for some reason, a howler for me.
Well, that's the only time he spoke in the film, right?
I think he says thanks at the end when Rufus promises to put in a good word for them. I think Kevin Smith also was not. He was. I think gives a good performances in this too, especially when he's carrying Bethany at the end. So what is our score there, Keith?
It is 79.6.
Very nice. Okay, so I can officially decree that on Dogma, we are siding with the audience.
Nice. Good job, audience.
Yeah, I think they got it right. And I'm curious, too, if someone, I mean, obviously we're doing like a retrospective retake, but if people were to rediscover this movie, I don't think there's, I think it still holds up. I think there's still a lot of very relevant things that are said that people hopefully can rediscover about this.
Yeah, there's definitely a few jokes that are of its time, but I do think that there are still discussions to be had. A lot of, like you were saying, a lot of great philosophy that's just kind of being thrown around that you don't get in a lot of, modern productions, even when they're faith-based. Most times you get something like God's Not Dead, but...
Oh, yeah. The other side of the spectrum. I was thinking, too, like comparing it to super aggressively anti-religious movies, but then, you have the other side of the spectrum, too.
Yeah, that's true. You get both. You get both.
I just think of more Da
sides.
Vinci Code. Like it instead of like it's dealing with like
but
Jesus.
Da Vinci Code.
Like it's when Ron Howard directed Dogma.
Oh my God! Well, like the thing is, Da Vinci Code, the movie, has no sense of humor about itself at all, and that was probably like one of the most boring movies I'd ever seen.
Yeah, no, but I wanted to. The only reason why I'm comparing it is like. I know you said it was boring, and I would probably agree. But in terms of entertaining religious movies that don't have like that isn't like God's Not Dead or anything like that, it's like just solely like here's the plot, give Tom Hanks a bad haircut and let him solve puzzles, like Thriller.
Yeah, it's sort of like, and maybe it's definitely more about religion, Dogma, but like a movie like say like Field of Dreams, where it sort of speaks to spirituality less so than like
film.
That's God, and that's Christ, and you got to build that field because that's that's what you're. Obviously, it's sort of what they're saying in a sense. It's a little religious, but it's not like forcing it in your face.
It's disguised enough to fool people into not getting upset.
So what you're saying in Field of Dreams 2, when after they build the field, out of the cornfield comes Jay and Silent Bob.
That would definitely make for a sequel. I would watch.
Call it Field of Nightmares. So thank you, Bobby, for joining us on this discussion. Always a pleasure having you on.
Always fun to be talking with you both. It is.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? We mentioned this movie is kind of hard to find, so maybe we could share the link to the YouTube version of this or something. I don't know. You could find it. It's not hard to find actually on YouTube.
We could. I think if you type in on YouTube Dogma full movie 1999, like it's real or something
and
like.
The thumbnail is of like the friendly Jesus statue. Like what did they call it?
Buddy Christ.
Buddy Christ. That's
Christ.
like the thumbnail. That's the whole movie. At least as of right now, it's still up there. So go check out Dogma if you haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening as always. And check us out for more Divided Films soon.